Hi there. So in this screencast, I'm going to be showing you how to do neural networks with different number of hidden units using keras in R. And so yeah, in the previous screencast, we were looking at this visualization which shows you how the validation error evolves for different neural networks. There's 10 different neural networks, each with one hidden layer and a different number of hidden units here from 2 to 1024 in the different panels. And so what we can see is that, well, it's quite a bit more variable. The validation error jumps around quite a bit more when you have more hidden units, a bit more stable when you have fewer. But these numbers are not quite comparable because every time what we did in our code is we called this model fit function with validation split equals 0.3 every time, which tells keras to do a random subtrain validation 70%, 30% split every time. And so every one of these models has a different 70-30 split, so it's not straightforward to compare these numbers. So instead, what we could do is we could kind of set aside a validation data set ourselves, and we could do that. So let's try to do that. So instead of yeah, so I guess what we should do is first look at the other project. So how do we specify this? Validation. I know there's an argument called validation data. So let's look at the let's look at the documentation on the keras website about this. So let's see. Actually, we have a link in the project description for project 4. So let's take a look at that. So that should open up. But the idea is that here there should be an argument that lets us specify the validation set ourselves. And indeed, there's this argument called validation data. So let's look at the documentation. Validation data. Data on which to evaluate the loss in any model metrics at the end of each epoch. The model will not be trained on this data. This could be a list, xval, yval, or a list, xval, yval, val sample weights. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to provide a list of 2 items. The first item will be the x, and the second item will be the y. So let's do that. So going back to our script, instead of using validation split equals 0.3, let's do validation split. Validation data equals list x validation map y validation. So these are 2 variables that we haven't created yet. So if we run this code, it's gonna give us some error that they're not found. So let's create them first. So let's do that. How do we do that? Well, we have to do that before going into this whole for loop if we want to make sure that it's the same over each model size. So let's think about that. So how to do that? We have our y train, which is all of the data in the train set. We want to split that into a subtrain in the validation set. So let's say valid fold vec, or actually, why don't we just very simply divide it into half subtrain and half validation, just to see what that looks like. So how would we do that? Well, let's just say is subtrain gets rep true false So one way to do it. L equals length y train. And then let's use sample to get a random assignment of true and false. So here is subtrain is a vector with 1840 true values and 1840 false values. Make sure they always are in the same place for reproducibility purposes. Let's do a set seed here. Is subtrain is this, and say is validation is not is subtrain. So that's one way to do is split into half subtrain, half validation. And then what we need to do is, here what we're going to do is x subtrain mat, y subtrain. So let's do that. So now we have to create these x subtrain, x validation, y subtrain, y validation. So x subtrain mat equals x train is subtrain, x validation mat gets x train is validation, y subtrain gets y train is subtrain, y validation gets y train is validation. So that should do our split. So yeah, it should be x train every time. So now we have a split of x subtrain map, which is 1840 our matrix with 1840 rows. Same thing with x validation map. That's the matrix with 1840 rows. It's different different values, so they're the same size because we did half and half, split into subtrain and validation. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to run this code here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first put all of this code kind of at the top here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinitialize this units metrics list, and then recompute this units, hidden units new. This is going to be from 2 to 1024 again. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this this loop. Well, it's not a loop, it's a parallel version of the computation, and in the next screencast I'll come back when that computation finishes.